Hello, you sentient ball of stardust. My name is Casey Davis. I'm a therapist and I'm an author of the book How to Keep House While Drowning, where I talk about ways to make it a little bit easier to take care of yourself when you're overwhelmed, stressed, have mental health issues, physical health issues, or maybe you're just in a hard season of life. Maybe you're looking for a place that you can come and listen to some practical advice. This is a podcast for all of the self-help rejects. We're going to talk about skills for survival and self-kindness. And I'm going to leave the pop psychology at the door. I promise not to tell you to meditate or to journal. We're just going to give you some really insightful conversations with hopefully some practical advice. So I don't believe you need to pick yourself up by the bootstraps. I don't want you to just try harder, and I don't believe that laziness exists. So join me over on Struggle Care, where we can find compassionate solutions that help us function a little bit better.
New on Curiosity Stream. How do you connect a 16th century potato to limitless energy production? Could Napoleon's toothpick have a direct link to a machine that predicts the future? And how can a 1700s conch shell chart a course to humans connecting their brains to the internet? James Burke's visionary series Connections returns for a new generation. Experience all new Connections. With monthly, annual, and bundled plans, find the one that works for you at curiositystream.com.
Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Elena Grace, and you are listening to another episode of I've Been Thinking, so thank you for that. I come to you today on a solo episode, which is becoming less and less common on this podcast lately. I've just had so many awesome guests with such incredible insights and things to say and cool experiences that I love sharing with you guys. And also, I'm sure it's boring to just hear me twanging all the time. So I've been trying to bring cool people on for you, and I hope that you enjoy that, especially the past few episodes. They've been really good, haven't they? Sydney is just incredible. She's such a sweet friend, such a good person, and Sam is such an absolutely amazing creator, and she's also so sweet too. And so I hope that you've loved the past few episodes and hope you're loving the guests. But I do miss coming on and just talking to y'all too. So you're gonna have to let me know what you like better, what fills your cup more. But anyway, moving on. Today, I'm really excited to talk to you about this. And just so you know, this is actually, so I'm going to be talking to you about organized religion. Okay, I'll just get that out there before I keep stumbling over my words. Organized religion and basically why I no longer vibe with it. Okay. And this is a really hard and important topic for me because it has been a long time coming, and I'll explain that. But I'm actually going to expand on this on Patreon. So if you are not already a Patreon member, go get on there. There is a link in the show notes. You can find it from my website. You can find it on my Instagram page. It's linked in my bio for my website. I mean, get on Patreon because I am really working hard on upping my content game on there, making sure that I'm more consistent, first of all, but secondly, improving the content that I get out to you all because I have a lot of fun with Patreon, but I want to start bringing you even better stuff, okay? And this is the beginning of it. So right after I finish recording this episode, I'm going to go open a bottle of wine and come back and dive into this even more. and really just talk from a personal perspective about this topic, because this episode that we're about to dive into is certainly a very personal situation, but is also, it has a lot of research in it, right? So I'm going to go even more personal, talk about experiences, that kind of thing, that have really turned me off of organized religion. And, going into this, I do want to say that this is obviously all from my perspective. I am a blonde, privileged, Southern Baptist raised little cute girl. I mean, honestly. And I have had a lot of experiences that a lot of other people haven't had. I have not had a lot of experiences that a lot of other people have had, for the good and the bad. And this is the point that I have come to in terms with my idea of organized religion. And anyway, I'll explain more. So I'll explain more by just getting into the episode and what I've written before I ramble, because this is why I write things, so that way I don't go off and just ramble on stuff. But that is what Patreon is going to be for. So anyway, religion, right? I've defined religion for you versus spirituality. So religion is the social, organized, in typically more public ways through which practitioners relate to, learn about, and worship their concept of the divine. Whereas spirituality is the more private, personal version, and is typically far less defined by some kind of leadership. It's typically a very personal, a very unique idea of a relationship with God, right? So a lot of people describe these two as entirely different concepts. Some people will say that spirituality is a part of religion, and that's totally fair and valid. And I rather think that spirituality should be a part of religion. Whereas some people will say or just insinuate that you can't have one with the other, right? Because a lot of people, I think that they're two entirely different things. And I don't think they have to be, but I think that idea that they're two different things really causes some trouble, right? So in some places, that separation is more culturally significant for some reason, I think. And with some people, they will glorify one and demonize the other. Kind of going back to what I said, it causes a lot of problems. For example, I was often told by an, quote unquote, adopted aunt of mine, who she is an incredibly spiritual being, but she's also a very religious woman, that she would always tell me that I'm spiritual and mystical. And, a little 9-year-old Southern Baptist child who can do the Sunday school trivia like it's nothing. Like, I have so much trivia in my brain, okay? I always won the trivia games, and the other kids were always like, that's no fair, it's because your aunt's the teacher. And my aunt was like, true, but no. She actually won. Anyway, I didn't know what to do with somebody telling me that I was mystical. It scared me. I mean, hell, religion in general has always terrified me. And then being told that I was something that I was told from the pulpit that I shouldn't be was really terrifying. But at the same time, I knew in my heart of hearts that I was, right? And that was really terrifying too, that I knew that I was this thing that I was kind of being told I shouldn't be. And that's the main problem, basically, that I have with organized religion. And if you asked me this question 10 years ago, I would never have dared question the validity of religion in a corporate sense. Corporate meaning the learning and worship as a group, right? 5 years ago, I would have still lauded the importance of the group setting, but perhaps I would have said, it's not really for me at this point in time. I'm like I don't have to go to church to have a relationship, right? But now, at this point in my life, I've come to realize that the group setting is most important for one thing: indoctrination and control. Now, bear with me, guys, okay? Like, don't sharpen your stakes and light your torches yet. First, I want to pause real quick because I want to say how insane it is to me that I'm going through this realization, and I'll tell you why. Because my grandfather, my Papa Terry, did something very, very similar. He went on this kind of journey for himself. And then when I was small, I watched my dad say, Karen, God isn't just in that church building. I don't have to go there to believe in him, right? My belief doesn't revolve around a building. And my mom always told me that my papa did the same thing and that it was his fault. My dad thought that way, which is hilarious. And it's funny that now I'm going through the exact same thing. And you can, of course, argue that it's because of that influence. And I think to some extent that that's absolutely true because I've carried that statement with me for my whole life. Always in the back of my mind, God's not in a building. I don't have to go there to believe in him. My belief does not exist around a brick building, right? But I also have to wonder if I don't have some kind of predisposition to it that's been passed down through generations, through my father's line, to give me this healthy skepticism and this deep spirituality, and also a deep-seated desire to rebel. That's my romanticizing of it. But if you know my father, or if you are my father, hey Pops, you might say, Elena, what do you mean Colonel Campbell likes to rebel? But just trust me on that one, okay? But this is kind of my point. This brings me back around to indoctrination and control. Because religion is an institution, and as such, it's created by and for man. And typically, I would clarify that I mean man in the general sense, the anthropos sense of the word, where it's, humanity. But unfortunately, that's not typically the case when we talk about religion. It is a lot of the time created by and for males, right? And that really sucks. Really sucks. Christianity, in spite of Jesus Christ's veneration of women and his mother in particular, as well as his calls for equality and his example of closely befriending a former sex worker and treating her as his equal in all ways, Mary Magdalene, Christianity came to fruition in a very patriarchal corner of the world, first of all, and thus carries with it deep-seated tones of misogyny. For example, once, as a little girl, I asked my dad why we didn't believe women could be pastors. And he told me he thought it was entirely because of the Apostle Paul's sexism that bled into his writing of the biblical books. Tell me, then, how the Bible is an accurate representation of God's true word. I mean, it's God's word. Yeah, sure, okay. As given to man and written by man's fallible, impressionable hands. Furthermore, what we read today is not the original translation, obviously. Now, I don't know if y'all know this, by the way, but Jesus wasn't white, Mary wasn't blonde, and they sure as spaghetti didn't speak English. So then we have not only the issue of translation bias from those original authors who were supposedly writing God's word as it was given to them. They were supposed to be doing that, but were they? Something that they are going to have to deal with. Well, they are, I suppose, dealing with in the afterlife. But we also have translation bias from those men who originally translated it from Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic into Latin and then into English. Recently, this is really interesting to me, recently a young female classicist retranslated the Bible from its original languages into English, and upon comparison found that there were a bunch of instances where the original language used terms as general as, quote, women and girls. But the original translations into English made the choice to translate those into such terms as whores and prostitutes. Like, why? Why do we have to do that? Why did y'all feel that was necessary? You know? And then my favorite thing about this is that somebody on Twitter, some guy responded to it and was like, well, obviously she had bias when she was retranslating that. You should have somebody who's trained in the languages as well as the culture and blah, 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 blah of the time, all this stuff. And somebody was like, what do you think a classicist is? Like, literally what you're talking about. Anyway, then, you know, there's the fact that in the early 1900s, translations of the Bible were reworded to focus on homosexuality, when in fact the original translation said that men shall not lay with boys, which is in fact referring to pedophilia, which was incredibly common in the Mediterranean countries. Homosexuality was kind of less socially accepted, but could be more. It just depended on the culture in wherein it's happening, right? The culture that the homosexuality is in context with. But, you know, that's a really important change. I would guess that this change in verbiage had to do with the general culture of the time of the early 1900s, because homosexuality still wasn't socially acceptable at this point, but there wasn't the same kind of religious fervor against it then that there has been in the years since, right? And if you remember back to, was that episode 59, our Pride episode, we talk about homosexuality kind of in the Mediterranean, and that's a really good episode. You should check that out if you haven't already. Just a little plug for myself there. But can we talk for a second also about how ironic it is that the verbiage was changed from focusing on pedophilia to homosexuality, when in fact so many religious leaders of the Christian and Catholic faith have been outed as pedos. I mean, are you kidding me? I literally watched a show the other day on Netflix where a man talked about his experience being sent to a conversion therapy camp as a teenager, where the quote-unquote men, you know, trash bags, who were in charge of the camp raped him while he was there. Excuse me? What the fuck? What is that? Okay. Furthermore, and along those very same lines, we have the imposition of leaders' interpretations of the word onto the translation, or onto how they read it to us, not just how they translate it, but also how they read it to us. And that's how we should worship, and how we should interpret the Bible, and how we should perceive ourselves and others. This is all colored by the way leaders read it. And that doesn't sit right with me. I don't like being told by someone who has their own biases how I should understand the world and myself. You know? I mean, I've gotten in trouble at church so many times for my whole entire life. And my mom is the same way. She had to get escorted out of the church building one time. But that's a long story. But her brother and brother-in-law escorted her out. It's not like she was the problem. It's that somebody was coming after her because my mom said, you're bullshit, basically. Anyway, that's a story for another day, and I'll let Karen tell that one if she ever wants to. But my mom has been known to cause trouble because she says, hey, that's not okay. And I've always been the same way. My mom had to, just the same way her brother had to once when she was younger. my mom has had to walk me out of the church in such ways that I'm avoiding the pastor so that I can't say something to him. For example, one time a pastor, a young man, someone who should know better, someone who did not come from the 1950s, he had the sweetest wife in the world, okay? And he stands in the pulpit and he says, your wife should always do what you say. She should always be subjugated to you. I said, excuse me, from the second row pew that my mother likes to sit in. I mean, the look that man gave me, saucer eyes. And he hated me anyway. I was 19 years old. I was loud. The kids listened to me. The youth group kids listened to me, and they didn't listen to him. He was the youth pastor. He hated me. But when I said that, my mom was like, oh my gosh, Elena's gonna hit him before we leave. She's gonna cause a scene. So my mom was like, Elena, please do not cause a scene. Like, don't do it. I'll take care of it like after the sermon's over. And I'm like, all right, you better. But that's not okay. That doesn't sit right with me. That's not okay in general, but here's the thing. If that's what you want to decide for yourself in your own relationship, that the man's the boss and the wife is number B, that's not okay, but that's your own decisions. That's your own decisions as consenting adults. That's the only way that's okay, right? Being told by a man in a pulpit under the guise of being a man of God, being told by him that the woman should be less than the man and the man should be in control is the biggest bullshit I've ever heard in my life. I will not be told anything like that. Anyway, so moving back, here's just a good old kicker, just in case all of that wasn't enough. In case you didn't know this, the Bible, specifically the New Testament, has tons and tons and tons of books that were not included in the selection of what would be utilized by the church and then eventually disseminated amongst the public as, quote, the Word of God. Do you think that God chose which books would be included and which would be kept low-key secret in the basement of the Vatican? What's your guess? What do you think? So, I'm fired up. I can't wait for this Patreon episode. I know that I framed all of this from my perspective, this perspective of a Southern Baptist raised little blonde girl from southeastern Kentucky, once again. But the thing is, this bastardization of spirituality happens in plenty of organized religions. Islam is very similar to Christianity in terms of its misogyny, its bias, poor translations, and bad influence from people who are seen as, quote, leaders. Now, not to say that there aren't extremist Christian organizations, because there absolutely are, and they are under the exact same kind of influence that any extremist organization is. But I will tell you that I know that specifically in the case of Al-Qaeda, they rely on uneducated and poor young men who are willing to be indoctrinated into a translation. Willing isn't even a fair term, though, because they're being indoctrinated into a translation of the Quran that is, first of all, picked apart and they're only given pieces of it. But second of all, they cannot read what they're being indoctrinated into because either they just don't know how to read or they don't have access to it in their native language by these Al Qaeda, recruiters and trainers who are indoctrinating them into this extremism. Plus, half the people there, not like the big guys, well, the big guys too, half the people there are just there for the money. Like, a lot of the people who are in a lot of these extremist organizations aren't even there for the religious part of it, for whatever they're willing to sacrifice themselves for. A lot of people are just there for the money, or because they have to be, because their fucking psycho husband dragged them into it or something like that. I mean, it's psycho. But or their dad or their crazy mom, whoever it is, a lot of people are indoctrinated into or raised into these crazy organizations, and they just don't know. They don't know the difference. They don't realize that they're being told a very one-sided story. It's not fair. And it gives such a negative view of religion as a whole. And that's shitty. Now, on this note, I've been super interested lately in ex-Mormons sharing their stories, especially on TikTok. That's like a really big place for ex-Mormons to share their stories, but also Wesley Christensen from Wake Up with Wesley. It's one of my favorite podcasts. She shared her story of leaving the church, and that was a really incredible thing to hear. And one of the biggest things that all of these former LDS members say is that they could not stand the amount of control the church tried to have on their lives, specifically women. They were told what to do, what to wear, what to say, etc. And then they were shamed terribly if they didn't fit into the mold that these men wanted them to. I mean, who cares if the men fit a certain mold, by the way, but the women have to. Mormonism, by the way, is a whole mess that honestly, I don't want to insult anybody. And I know that technically every religion is kind of made up to an extent, but damn if Mormonism ain't made up. Like, Joseph Smith just you cannot convince me he did not just want an excuse to marry a bunch of women, some of whom were like 16 and 13, by the way, and then, quote unquote, marry, aka sleep with legally, adultery. And you also can't convince me that only a set number of people are allowed into heaven. What are they going to do? I don't know. Someone that's more deserving of you just showed up at the gate, got a Spartan kick some poor soul off the edge. I mean, I'm really sorry if you're Mormon. That's just my 1 cent. But, I've trashed the religion I grew up with too, if that makes it better. This girl ain't loyal. I don't care. Now, even Gandhi, right, who is revered as a folk hero in India, and he was pivotal in the fight against Britain's continued colonization, as well as being revered as a spiritual leader and guide by many people of many faiths, as well as for those of no particular faith at all. He was an incredibly racist, classist, and sexist man. Frankly, he was a pedo, who, once again, no surprise, who had young girls sleep naked in the bed with him to, quote, test his strength. Okay, freak. Now, I know that this is kind of a side tangent because Gandhi isn't technically a tenet of organized religion, but he is an awesome example of how spiritual leaders' sins can be washed by the media, and thus our perception of them is devoid of their context as a whole, which can then, and often should, undermine the credibility of their teaching. So, that's a little side note. But no, if all of this is making you go, what? Let me give you a prime example. Just a quick one to round it out, okay? Y'all remember that awesome movie, The Book of Eli, right? The whole point of the movie is that all Bibles and basically all other literature has been destroyed in a nuclear holocaust. The main antagonist is a neo-Western warlord named Carnegie, and he really wants a Bible really bad so that he can control the townspeople through its word. Now, isn't that interesting? So unlike anything else in history, the Pope, King Ferdinand, King Henry changing things around, King Henry the Eighth changing things around to fit his ideas. Hell, the town in Footloose. I mean, we see that a lot. People using the Bible to control people to get what they want done. People love to bastardize religions to meet their own needs. The main tenets of Christianity, for example, are loving your neighbor, providing for those who have less than you, standing up for others, treating others equally, forgiving people for their wrongs. Good stuff. That's what Jesus did. But instead, Christianity and Catholicism are used to exclude people from God's love, to encourage hate, to fuel feuds, to participate in performative activism, and to rationalize segregation. Now, and to rationalize colonization and genocide. Little side note. Jesus would want, not even a side note, a post-it note on the front of the book. Anyway, Jesus would not want those things. Jesus would want us to help people. I mean, God reiterates time and time again that he loves his children. P.S. Why does God have to be a he? I mean, that's how I refer to him out of habit, but I think that assigning a gender as we perceive it to an omnipotent creator being is a little unnecessary. But anyway, God loves his children, all of them. He doesn't say all of them except these ones. He says all of his creation. This is all to say that I don't vibe with organized religion anymore. If you do, good for you. I'm happy for you. But it's way too much control and too much bias for me. So I want to encourage you to at least think about how you would worship and how you would believe if you weren't being told how to. Think, read, and research for yourself. Develop ideas outside of your religious leaders' ideas. And, if you decide one day that you don't believe those ideas anymore, or if you decide that you believe something entirely different, that's okay. But don't ever let someone tell you that in order to believe in Jesus or whomever, that you have to do a certain set of arbitrary things. The only thing that you have to do is wholeheartedly, with the utmost faith, love, intention, and goodwill, believe in what you choose. Guys, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. Make sure that you check out Patreon for the expansion on this. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be a good one. I've not recorded it yet, but by the time you're listening to it, I will have, and it'll be wild. Make sure that you follow along on Instagram. I will probably post some clips from the recording so you can get a little taste. At I've Been Thinking Pod on Instagram. That's also how you stay up to date with new episodes and new stuff going on, all that good stuff. Make sure that you are following or subscribed wherever you listen. And then for notes and sources from today's episode, check out the website I'veBeenThinkingPod.com. Guys, thank you so much for listening, and I love you, and I will talk at y'all next week. Bye!
Hello, you sentient ball of stardust. My name is Casey Davis. I'm a therapist, and I'm an author of the book How to Keep House While Drowning, where I talk about ways to make it a little bit easier to take care of yourself when you're overwhelmed, stressed, have mental health issues, physical health issues, or maybe you're just in a hard season of life. Maybe you're looking for a place that you can come and listen to some practical advice. This is a podcast for all of the self-help rejects. We're going to talk about skills for survival and self-kindness. And I'm going to leave the pop psychology at the door. I promise not to tell you to meditate or to journal. We're just going to give you some really insightful conversations with hopefully some practical advice. So I don't believe you need to pick yourself up by the bootstraps. I don't want you to just try harder, and I don't believe that laziness exists. So join me over on Struggle Care, where we can find compassionate solutions that help us function a little bit better.
Wake up at Holiday Inn Express to a can't-miss breakfast that's free with every stay. Count on all the hot, fresh coffee you need and an incredible breakfast buffet that has something for everyone, like eggs, cinnamon rolls, and even hot, fresh pancakes with all the toppings you crave. Next time, do yourself a favor and stay at a Holiday Inn Express with a can't-miss breakfast that's free with every stay. So, when you wake up at Holiday Inn Express, you'll wake up happy, a part of IHG Hotels and Resorts.